welcome to another episode of Found It, Fetched It. This week I'm joined by the amazing LWDG group expert Claire Denia, and we're talking all about does being around wildlife reduce drive or actually build better control? Before I get started, as always, Claire, how are you?
I'm very well, Joe. Thank you. How are you?
I am good, and I'm really interested in chatting about this because this could be really confusing for some people and for some dogs, probably at the beginning, when you're like, I want you to pick up this, but I don't want you to pick up this, and I want you to do this, but I don't want you to do this. So I think talking about it might be a fab way of just clarifying some ideas in people's mind. So let's talk about drive first. Drive isn't like this little fragile thing that if we do something, we're going to take all their drive away, is it? Unless we do something pretty dramatic, drive is an inherent trait.
Yeah, so different dogs and different breeds of dogs and different personalities of dogs will have different drives, different innate behaviors. And of course, so let's take retrievers, within retrievers, you're going to get varying dogs of different levels of drive. So, like when you look at a reluctant retriever, you might be working with a dog that lacks drive unless the scenario looks like this or unless the retrieve involves this. And with spaniels, you'll get spaniels that we call real hard hunting spaniels, these dogs that really get their nose down and there doesn't need to be real scent. They just get their nose down and they just don't care. They just hunt. And then you get the other ones where if there's not real scent, they go, why are you asking me to hunt this? There's nothing there. Yes, and we can damage drive by overcorrecting dogs in steadiness training. Absolutely, that can be done. But generally, when we look at drive, we're looking at the dog's natural game finding ability, the dog's natural desire to get the job done.
And for most dogs, when they see birds or wildlife, especially when they're pups, that drive, that instinct kicks in and says, let's go and see if I can grab hold of that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Puppies see things and they're like, yay, something to chase. And so it takes a lot of steadiness and self-control training to teach a dog appropriately when they can and can't chase. And there are certain things that is never going to be okay for your dog to chase, like livestock. We never want our dogs to chase livestock. So we have to start to teach the dogs how to differentiate between the things we want them to chase and the things we don't, and when we want them to chase and when we don't want them to chase. So that's all part of the education.
And I suppose part of the conversation around this as well is when a dog is out on an estate doing a job, we had this chat beforehand when we were like planning this. The birds are only part of the story, aren't they? We want them to follow training behaviors. So even though the birds are there, and there may be thousands of them or hundreds of them, whatever it is, we still need them to follow what we've trained.
Absolutely. It's not a free for all, or shouldn't be a free for all, should I say. So if you look at a dog in the beating line, you look at, the predominantly you're going to get spaniels or smaller gundog breeds in a beating line. Yes, we do have other breeds in the beating line at our shoot. We have a HPR in the beating line. We have retrievers in the beating line. So in this day and age, it's not so set that spaniels do this and HPRs do that and retrievers do this. But if you look at what a beating dog does, they're hunting the area in front of their handler and they're covering that ground to ensure that birds don't escape back through the line, disappearing the wrong way, or out the side, out the wrong way. And the dog is hunting that area and they might be asked to sit steady because the birds are ahead. They might have to walk to heel for a little while so that they don't disturb the birds too early. And then at certain points, they'll be let to go forward and push the birds so that they flush the birds. But it's all very controlled. It's not just a free-for-all, let the dogs go wild and hunt the area and birds coming out left, right, and centre and them chasing them. It's not like that at all. And when you're picking up, depending on the shoot that you work on, there is different shoot etiquette for different shoots. But generally, rule of thumb is usually along the lines of when them birds are hit, if they are pricked or wounded and injured, they need to be picked straight away. But otherwise, the dog is sitting very steady, marking those areas of fall, and then picking them. So it's training, it's controlled. It's not just dogs running around like lunatics chasing birds, and they have to learn as well. And I have this conversation with clients all the time, and when some of my clients come and join the shoot for the first time, it's part of the education, is that the dogs have to learn to distinguish between the birds that are injured, wounded, or shot dead, and ones that are alive and kicking and are not to be touched. And that's part of the training as well. We don't touch those birds, but we do touch these birds. And so that's all part of the training.
Yeah, because I suppose for a lot of people, they're only understanding to a certain extent of hunting if they've not been around the sport. Maybe something like years ago with fox hunting, where there was a group of dogs chasing the prey. So they may quite understandably and appropriately think that's what goes on. But in fact, chasing a bird is like the least thing we want the dog to do, unless, of course, in those scenarios you've suggested, we really want them to be waiting for our control. It's actually a control exercise, a control skill, isn't it?
It's the opposite of what most people that don't understand think it is. So very often people will say, my dog would be amazing because it chases birds. And I'm like, yeah, but we don't want them to chase the birds unless we say retrieve the bird. So it is usually the opposite. And this is where gun dog training so much can support and help pet owners with their dogs being under control around wildlife, is because we teach the dogs when it is and isn't appropriate to move in on the thing, to retrieve the thing, to chase the thing. And most of the time we're saying don't. Unless I tell you to, the answer is don't. So it's very often the opposite to what people believe it might be.
When you said that about people saying to you about the dog chasing stuff, so it'd be brilliant, you've made me laugh out loud because I was thinking, I've heard that so many times as well. This is where actually wildlife can actually be a real powerful training opportunity for us, can't it? Because we can use that so much in our benefit for a dog to learn steadiness and decision making.
100%. And it is so true. And it's really useful for people, both pet owners and owners of working dogs, who perhaps don't have access to game outside of the shoot season, because not many people do. Not many people do. And so actually being able to utilize wildlife for your steadiness and self-control training is for a lot of people the only way of teaching their dog not to chase just because the thing moves and things like that. So, for example, John and I, it was Rosie's birthday. John and I took the girls to the beach, the dogs, that is, not girl people, the dogs, the girl dogs, to the beach. And you've got seagulls and you've got other birds that are flying around. And we went past where there was this really pretty little area, and there were swans on it. Now, of course, dogs cannot touch swans. Let's just make that very clear. And I said to John, oh, isn't this just amazing steadiness training? Because none of these birds are on the table. I don't mean on the table literally, but what I mean is none of these birds are here to be retrieved. So what better way to work on steadiness and self-control around birds, but to just walk in this beautiful area and allow the dog to sit and watch, or walk to heel and watch, and they don't get any of it. And so they're learning that not everything that flaps a wing is for them. And so it's perfect training. And like I say, really good if you don't have access to game outside of the season.
Yeah, and I also think for what we call now like the dual purpose dog or the multi-purpose dog, where it's not just a kennel dog that goes to a shoot, it's a dog that lives in the house and has to be like the shoot dog on a Saturday and the coffee shop dog on the Sunday. Having that self-control around things that are off the table is really important, because The last thing you want is your incredibly well-behaved spaniel on a Saturday flying after a cat on a Sunday. Like, it's literally gotta know, unless told otherwise, you are not going after anything that your prey drive suggests you should. Because
Yeah,
I suppose as well, think of all the problems people come to us with. It's chasing car tires, it's chasing bikes. They all stem from not controlling their prey drive.
yeah, and 100%. That's exactly it. And so you look at this and you're saying all of these things come back to prey drive. All of these things come back to innate desires and drives within the dog. And so we have to harness them and we have to teach the dog what they can and can't do. And yes, sometimes we have to give them an outlet for those behaviors as well so that we don't get behavioral problems creeping into other areas of the dog's life because very often for me, when I'm working with a dog who has, for better word, reactivity issues, whatever that reaction looks like, whether it's frustration, whether it's overexcitement, whether it's anxiety, a lot of these behaviors that are creeping into the dog's everyday life are generally because that dog isn't being given fulfillment and isn't being given an outlet for drives that are so deeply rooted. And so it wants to chase the car, it wants to chase the cyclist or the runner because I need to chase something and no one is giving me an outlet for this. And so you can see how these little behavior problems start to creep in. And we have to look at this so holistically. We have to say, okay, what's the dog's day-to-day life look like? What sort of training do you give the dog? What sort of exercise does the dog get? We have to look at all this and be like, we can train the dog to use those drives in a productive way that also give you a hobby or something you can do with your dog on the walks rather than it come into and leak into everyday life and develop into behavioural problems.
We were doing a training session with members not so long ago, and I was talking about the joy I had in seeing young litters because my dad used to breed, so I'd see young litters. But I was also talking about how at 5, 6 weeks old, you could take a pup, roll a tennis ball, and that pup would pick up that tennis ball and try desperately to bring it back to you. And I was thinking, how incredibly amazing is it that at that tiny age, that want to work with you to hunt, to chase, to retrieve, and bring back to you is there. We work so hard on developing that in a really positive environment to become something fabulous. But part of what we do when we go on these countryside walks is say, like you just said, there's a point when we're going to do that really cool stuff, buddy. But when we're out here and we're on a park and there's 52 deer walking past, that's not the time.
Correct, yeah. But what you just touched on there is really important because you're bang on. A lot of these behaviors that we do want that are innate to the dogs and build these drives in the dogs, as puppies, they show us that. But how quickly do some owners and handlers ruin that and end up with the dog resource guarding or playing keep away and other behaviors that seep in because instead of embracing it and actually saying, wow, you're so amazing, you're so clever, we're like, put that down, you can't have that in your mouth, chasing the dog around the lounge. And so we start to create the dog that goes, hang on a minute, I am bred to do this, I was born to do this, you don't like me doing it, where am I going to find an outlet for that? And so you can see how those things that you do in the home with a puppy, which is so just there in the puppy's soul that they want to do it, we destroy that and then wonder why we have problems with the dogs out and about. And so you can see this whole pattern forming. And I suppose you can backtrack and go, this is where that started. This is where that came from.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about where people could really like just let the environment, let the countryside be in their favor. We teach our members, like it's one of the first things we teach them. You gotta have a good leave, haven't you? Because if you're gonna go into all these environments where things are going to stimulate your dog, you've gotta have a way of saying to the dog, this is not something we do that with.
Yeah, 100%. We say this all the time. Having a good trained leave, or another word that essentially means, I see that you see that, that's off the table. You can't have that. No is the answer. Whatever word it is, whether you're using leave or no or whatever, you're communicating to the dog that is not yours to have. It's off the table, off the card. You can't have it. And it's like a disengagement word. We're saying to the dog, that's not yours. But then we have to give the dog a reason to want to be with us and do things with us. And this is where training teaches the dog that. And I think the biggest mistake that we see, people are like, okay, so they're not allowed to do that. If I'm going to make them walk with me and I'm going to let them sniff the boundary on a long line or on a lead, and the dogs, this is boring. And it's give them something good to do. Teach the dog to engage with you in those environments. If we want the dogs to pay us attention in a more distracting environment, when all those other alternatives are there and we're saying you can't have them, we've got to equally give them something that they can do where they're like, actually, that's quite cool. I quite like doing that. Let's do this together. But very often people don't do that, and they try so hard. So I'm just going to train the dog at home for the first 6 months. I'm not going to take it out anywhere exciting because I don't trust it. We have to, while the dog is young and moldable, that's when you want to get that dog out into that environment and be like, you see this amazing world, but you also see amazing me. Not that I'm calling myself amazing, but you see where I'm going with this. This is amazing me, and I am going to provide you everything you need within this environment so you don't need to go chasing that deer, chasing that sheep. And we can do that if we start it young enough. The issue we have is very often people will avoid all of that with that puppy. And the dog, by the time it gets into those environments, it's an adolescent or even older. And it goes, well, this is amazing. You've been keeping me cooped up in the garden for the first 6, 7, 8 months of my life. Let me have freedom. See you later, alligator. And so all of a sudden, like that connection that you've been trying to build is lost. You missed out on that opportunity when the puppy was young, moldable, and wanted to be with you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And like when you were saying about taking the girls to the beach, how many dogs do you see on the beach who are like off the lead? Because people are like, oh, I'm taking them to the beach. I want to let them off and then be free. And they like hurtling after like seagulls and God knows what. And you're like self-rewarded. And then the next time they take them to the beach and the dog's like a lunatic and they're like, oh, I can't even take them to the beach. I can't do this with them. Or I can't take them to the park because it's squirrels and they are like choking themselves trying to get the squirrels. When we see all that, the owner never meant to do it. Nobody does. We don't know what we don't know. We tell you all that all the time. But the reality is we've inadvertently let them self-reward, and now we have an even bigger problem again.
Absolutely that, yes. And sometimes it's when you look at things and you're like, avoiding it is only going to make it worse down the line. However, there's also this element of if something's not really a big problem, just work through it and don't make a big issue of it. I think sometimes a dog will do something once and a handler will be like, oh, my dog did that, so I must avoid that for the next 6 months. And then the problem is still there 6 months later. You're better off sometimes just to work through these things and like make very little of it. You can, I'm trying to think of the right wording to like really express this. But it's, for instance, let's just say I was working with a dog and the first time it saw the postman, it barked at the postman, and I lost my mind about the fact that the dog barked at the postman. And then I was like, this is an issue. The next time the postman comes, I'm going to be like on it and I'm going to do this. Actually, that could have been a one-off. So maybe the next time the postman comes, I want to be like, oh, it's the postman. And I'm like, here you go, sweetheart. Sweetheart, I do call my dogs nice names. Isn't the postman wonderful? Instead of being like really bolshy, panicky, holding the dog really tight, creating more of a problem. Sometimes we just have to be like, let's just work through this and show the dog there's nothing in this. There's nothing about this that you need to be bothered of. It's like socialization for puppies. People can go really OTT if the puppy has a negative response to one thing. And instead of just being like, okay, maybe that was just a one-off. Let's just like work through this and see where we're going. They get fixated on that problem, and that problem then expands and becomes a way bigger problem.
I think as well, though, it's because we want our dogs, understandably, to be well behaved and have good manners. That's part of being a society wherever you live. And when we have a dog that I suppose just makes that difficult, we find it really hard to know how we work with that dog outside of the home. So then we don't take them outside of the home, and then the next time we do try, it becomes a massive problem for us. What you're talking about there is taking drive and giving it boundaries, isn't it? And
Yeah.
giving yourself reliability. So if you don't do these things, you can't get the boundaries. And if you can't get the boundaries, you can't get the reliability. And it's like a never-ending circle of dog being a dickhead every time you walk out the door.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And so the dog's world then gets smaller and smaller because the owner restrains them and restricts them more and more. So instead of the dog's life getting more enriched and fuller, the dog's world gets smaller because it's now I'm only going to do this in the garden or in the house. I'm not even going to take you there anymore. And so you're going to get more frustration and potentially more problems build. And when you try and re-access the outside world again after a big duration of time, the problem's not gone away. The problem won't have gone away. You've just prolonged it, or the dog's worse because they're like, way, I'm out here again. Where has this been for the last few months? And so the problem has actually now become bigger. And so you've always got to look at everything from safety, training to educating the dog. But training is the thing that will get your dog to behave the way you want it to behave in the environments you want to take it in. Avoiding environments and avoiding training will not achieve that. You have to crack on and do the work.
Yeah, because what we're talking about here is like their sensitivity, their maturity, their experience, I suppose, in all environments, all influence how they're going to behave, how they're going to be able to generalize in the next environment. And it's that, okay, if we can get them out and get them doing things as we want them to, they will become better wherever we go. And then instead of having a dog that's not loses it, but a dog that's been going to somewhere completely new and getting anxious, it could be. It might not be a drive thing. It might be that the dog becomes really anxious and doesn't want to go into an environment. All those different things that we see across the board. When we get them to be able to go anywhere confidently with these boundaries, like wildlife, country walks, all those things, they become fun again because you're like, I can take my dog literally anywhere in the UK and know that they will have a lovely day.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And a really good example, I'll come back to the beach trips. Jeannie, for anyone that doesn't know, she's our youngest and she was diagnosed with elbow dysplasia before she was a year of age. Quite a critical time in her life. She was going lame from 6, 7 months of age. So her world got smaller for a duration of about 6, 7, 8 months because she had surgery, she was then on rest. So she missed out on a big chunk of what was a very critical time in her education. Because of the injury and the pain and the surgery, she became very fearful of people, especially strangers, and developed stranger danger. Now, that was a real thing. It was a real fear and it was a real issue in her head. But what happens very quickly with dogs and behavior, if they feel that behavior works, it gets the end result, which for her was if I bark at a person, they back away. That's what she wanted. Even as we were doing confidence building training with her, which was so important because of everything she'd been through. This was obviously after she'd recovered from surgery and we were starting to increase her exercise. We had to get her out. That is not a comfortable thing to have to do. To know that your dog needs this and that it doesn't look pretty when it goes wrong because she barks. And as a trainer, you could actually get quite embarrassed and be like, I'm a trainer and my dog is fearful of people because of her experience. But being a trainer, I know that we have to work through this problem. So getting her out there. But what we learned very quickly as she got over fear, it started off, we generalized it with familiar people. Familiar people were no longer a problem. And she'd be like, I love you, and love them so much. But with strangers, especially strangers who suddenly appeared, she would be like, don't know that person. You look a bit intense. You're coming at me. Whoa, go away. But this was no longer fear. It was born through fear, but it was no longer fear. It was a learnt behaviour which needed correcting. So this is when the trained leave, that is not for you, says to the dog, I don't like that behaviour, you need to stop that. But alongside that, all the confidence building exercises and the teaching her that people were not scary. And now she's a dog who she will always have a little bit of stranger danger in her. It's there now. But through training, she's learned. And yesterday she went to the beach. There were people and dogs everywhere, and she was happy-go-lucky. She barked at one couple with a little cockapoo because she saw the cockapoo, thought it looked amazing and wanted to get to it. It was an excitable bark. And so it's them recognizing that, because it was like a high pitch, woo, like this at them. And I was like, oh no, we're not going over there. So now think the scales start to tip the other way, and you're like, oh, now we've got another thing. You can't go play with everybody just because we've now told you not everybody's scary. And, but you're letting that world open back up through training, through education, getting the dog to see these things and having a nice day out. And John was like dead chuffed at the end. He was literally like, she's walked all the way along that beach and back, all these people, and we had one excited little bark. And it's teaching the dog that's not okay. When we went for a coffee at the promenade, I'm going to call it, I think it's a promenade, went and got a coffee. There was one person that spooked her and she was like, woo, and we were like, leave it. And then she's, oh, okay. And we then say to the person, thank you. Sometimes the way that you respond to the person that the dog has barked at can help them, because they're like, oh, you seem to think they're okay. And the dog learns to trust your judgment, and that's really important. And whether you're looking at anxiety or frustration or overexcitement or dogs that want to chase wildlife, the process is pretty much the same. Teach the dog what you want, tell them what you don't want, reward the stuff that they do, and you're going to get there. I'm not saying everything is easy, but you will get there.
And I think that's hopefully giving all our listeners confidence. Like, we all have these challenges. To circle back to where we started, because we've covered a lot in this podcast, like quite a lot of like key concepts around dog training. To wrap it up, being out in wildlife, letting them look but not chase, is not going to frustrate them if you are using their outlet appropriately. It's actually going to be good for them, isn't it?
Yes, 100%. Utilize what you've got around you to teach your dog appropriate behaviors.
And to completely push all those myths out, high drive dogs can cope around wildlife perfectly well because that's what they were actually genetically built for. What we have to do is harness that drive in a way that says this is allowed, this isn't allowed, but only in very rare circumstances are you actually allowed to try to chase something that's alive.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Fabulous. So, listeners, if there's one thing to take away from this, is that being around wildlife doesn't affect your drive in your dog. It doesn't reduce it. What shapes your dog is what they repeatedly practice and what you consistently guide. Country walks, bird flushing, unexpected wildlife moments, they aren't training setbacks. They are absolutely real life opportunities for you to show your dog that excitement and partnership can exist at the same time. That is the sort of golden star we're all going towards. Your dog's drive isn't the enemy, but as Claire has clearly set out for you, avoiding it isn't going to build the reliability that you think it may. Consistent direction is what's going to build your confident dog, and getting them out into different environments is going to help you too. Like we always say at the LWDG, every dog is different, so teach the dog in front of you. Don't just give that lip service. work out what that actually means for your dog. If today's episode has made you pause and think about where your training is sitting right now, that's a brilliant place for you to start. Progress nearly always begins with awareness. If you've enjoyed this episode and found it fetched it, make sure you're following or subscribed so you don't miss the next one. And if you know someone who worries they're ruining their dog just by getting out on normal walks, send them this episode so they can work out exactly what they need to hear. Until we speak again in a fortnight, keep it simple and we hope you enjoy training the dog in front of you.